Yeah, we just need to make sure that the right thing.
Oh, so I'd like to know I'm getting a 0.
Back.
What I have to do with that? You're gonna drop it and it's gonna be International Space Station. Oh, it's the best. I really like that. You might get the case. It breaks. That's great. It's more fragile. A case of series is it also makes it even all it is. For a minute and 30 seconds. Yeah.
You know something. I can't get. You might be on camera. I can't get the audio.
Hello, everyone here so far. Thank you so much for your patience. We're just setting up the live stream and the mic and all those wonderful things that this day can bring us. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for being here. Just a reminder, the rules for the long table are posted along the wall. Anyone that is hard of hearing, feel free to come sit. It's not a matter of brevity, just if you feel like coming back. And thank you again for waiting. We're getting it all sorted. Thoughts and feelings. Speaking.
You know what? I can hear almost pretty okay now.
Okay.
What are your thoughts?
I think I agree. I don't know where it's working.
And maybe it is. Maybe it is. But I'm fairly certain that it's an audio.
So like, so that's coming. Is that louder? Where's the thing?
Like my computer hears it, but I don't think YouTube does.
Oh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
Should I just leave it plugged in just in case?
Yeah. As long as there's some audio.
I mean, she sounded fine, didn't she?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah? There's like 6 seconds of latency.
There's what?
6 seconds of latency.
Okay. I mean, I feel like it's fine.
Okay.
There's audio.
Let's make sure that the right people have the link.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not watch. Some of them are yes. Yeah, I'm just waiting. Jesse.
Yeah. Your sunset? Success. I think it's working. To the Zach. Just wait a minute on one cover, guys. I'm just going to call him and have him say it. I'm not even going to tell him. It's awfully conscious. Don't say anything that might come back to bite you. It's listening.
I think
we're going to do
Hey everybody! I'm just going to really quickly do land acknowledgement because we are on Indigenous lands right now. I apologize that I am reading it, but I myself am not terribly educated about this topic, and I plan to be in the future, but I'm not enough to just speak from my brain, so I'm going to read it. We would like to acknowledge our presence on ancestral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee Confederacy land as determined by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum. The intent of this agreement is for all nations sharing this territory to do so responsibly, respectfully, and sustainably in perpetuity. We respect the long-standing relationship with the local Indigenous communities, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, and the Six Nations of the Grand River. So we're going to begin. I think over to Trevor on the thing.
Hi, Trevor.
Oh. Oh no.
No. No. Still no.
Okay, wait 1 second.
Oh dear.
Just mind it, Trevor. Can you hear us?
Can you hear us?
No, it's up there.
Sound check, sound check. Check. 1, 2, 3.
It's working. We're just running some things.
Okay, I have somebody else. Yeah.
This is a wedding now. Exit stage. So it's not working. That's a good sign. It's a beautiful sound.
So close.
Problems on your end then.
Oh, because sometimes the audio is.
You're right.
Zach, Zach.
Yeah.
Have you tried the little camera thing in the top right corner? Sometimes that's why.
Oh.
Check 1, 2. Okay.
There it is.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. So let me be very brief, and thank you for dealing with our adventures in technology, everyone. So my name is Trevor Comp, and first of all, I'm sorry that I'm not where you are right now, which would be clearly the better situation. I had a gig come up before this event was what it is, and I'd way rather be in Hamilton today than be up in Sault Ste. Marie, which is a bit of a commute. So I wanted to make sure I videoed in and spoke as live as I possibly could to give some context for what brought us together today and how this sort of meeting came to be. But my goal is to do way more listening than speaking, so I promise I'll be brief. Late last year, I initiated a project to bring some Hamilton indie theatre groups together with the idea just that if we collaborated, we could build something stronger than trying to do it alone. But I initiated that without putting diversity front and center. And that was a terrible way to do it, and I apologize. This perpetuated the huge systemic problems that exist in Canadian theatre and in Canada. I really want to say a huge thank you to Jamie Malai Kasiyama and Senjudy Sarkar in particular. These are artists that really brought the attention of this problem most immediately to the artist Suffix. Are out there in the room with you, and they basically put the spotlight on this gap for us and really brought us here today. I want to say that my bad start doesn't mean that the idea is bad. I hope not. I still think that coming together is what needs to happen now. And it actually seems like this event is going to pull that off in better ways than our would-be collective was going to do it anyway. So wonderful. Whatever happens at this point moving forward, if we talk about a collective, if we talk about a festival, or if we just sit and talk about this systemic problem in Hamilton, I'm incredibly grateful for you coming out, and I'm happy to jump over to the live stream and do some listening. So thanks very much. And with that, over to you, Jamie.
Hi. Oh, is this? Hello? Yes. Hi. So I'm Jamie. My pronouns are they, them. And so what we'll be doing for the rest of the night is having a long table discussion. So a long table was created by Lois Weaver. And basically it's a cross between like a performance and like a public discussion. It's like a dinner table thing. Anyways, so basically around the room, there are these papers that have the rules. I'm going to read them out so that we all know them, but you can refer back to them. And they're also on this table. So the rules of the long table are that anyone seated at the table can join in on the conversation, and you can join the table at any time. Anyone not seated at the table listens. If all the seats are filled, you can tap someone on the table on the shoulder, and they will sit and they will get up, and you can fill their spot. There's allowed to be silence at the table. The conversation could go in any direction. There's no agenda for what we're going to talk about. What we talk about at the table is what we talk about, and where it goes is where it goes. If you leave the table, you can come back again and again and again. There are markers on the table, so feel free to come to the table and write on the paper or draw. There's so many different ways to participate. There can be awkwardness. There probably will be awkwardness, and that's fine. And there's an end, but there's no conclusion. So this conversation ends at 9:30. 9:30. And so the conversation ends wherever it ends. So I'm gonna sit at the table, and if anyone wants to come to the table. Oh. And for people, there's a fan. And for people at the live stream, the camera is only capturing these seats. So anyone who sits here, just be aware of that. But there are more people here.
However, the audio will pick up
Everybody. What's up, friends?
Hey.
Hi. I'm friend Judy. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
I don't think we've ever met.
No. Hi.
No.
I'm
Hi.
Michael.
Nice to meet you.
Nice
I've
to meet
seen your
you.
face around on Facebook.
I have never seen yours, so it's nice to meet you.
Oh, yes. Great.
She said it'd be awkward.
It's fine.
If you need more people at the table,
Feel free to
hey,
come.
you know, there's a few spots open.
Yeah. So
Let's start talking.
diversity in Hamilton's theater community, or lack of.
Let's start with what actually was what essentially went wrong with this. So we talked briefly about it, but what went wrong? Do we think? Some of the things that went wrong for me is the exclusive behavior.
Yeah. What do you mean by that?
Just reaching out to friends, I think, is something that went wrong in terms of that. Them being, those friends being then all white folks is something that came after. But something that actually initiated this problem, or even me thinking about, hey, this is a problem, is that it was reached out to friends, I would assume.
I mean, my understanding, so I was a member of the collective. I am a member of the collective. So my understanding was that this was a conversation that had been sort of going on for a long time, years, in fact. There were certain members of the theater community who recognized that there was a problem with smaller theater companies sort of getting gobbled up by the large one in this city. And
just the one.
yeah, and there seems to be a really, really large gap between the smaller community theaters and then the large one. And the hope was that, well, okay, so something that was sort of recognized was that there are so many small independent theater companies that try and start something up. They do a show and then they disappear. You know, they don't get the funding they need, or they don't have the resources. They don't understand how to properly produce. You know, there's a lot of theater practitioners who think, yeah, I'm going to put on a show. How hard could it be? And it's really hard. And we see it all the time in this community that certain companies start and go away. And so this conversation has been going on for a few years between certain members of the community. Myself, not so much. I wasn't really starting that conversation. But the idea was that perhaps as a unit, perhaps as a group, more than one company can work together, rely on one another's resources, help promote and market one another, and to create a regular and consistent season of theater that didn't go away when it was done. You know, these were people that would work together and keep it going at the same time. And so to comment on your point that it seemed as though friends were asked, yeah, and that does speak to a larger problem, that those we work with and those we know best are those we feel comfortable working with again and again and again, without much attempt at broadening our scope.
Right. Yeah, and I think part of what fed into that was just the sort of the rushedness or the immediacy of this project. Like it was sort of a kickoff of people and ideas that were meant to start really, really soon. And so I think part of going with people that we knew and had like a friend circle with was just a part of the fact that we wanted to do this in a matter of months, which was far too rushed to do a lot of things the right way. And so, and this being one of the big things that did come up in discussion, and it was such an overwhelming idea to us in discussion that we just kept brushing under the rug, which is absolutely not the right response. But that is sort of how it happened, because we had planned for an 18-19 season launch. So yeah, that's.
How do we get rid of it? How do we get rid of nepotism in like our community in general, like at large, rather than just, I'm not focusing on this collective, but like, how do we get rid of it?
Because I think that we all kind of do that, picking people that we know and trust, and not reaching out to like other artists that we may not have like a personal relationship to.
Yeah, I think
and it's hard with theater, because theater, you're spending so much time with the same people. You want to make sure that you like.
And it's such a vicious circle of like lack of opportunity, which then equates to lack of skills. And then that then equates to lack of opportunity again, because people want skills. But where do we start? Things like that.
So to comment on like the lack of skill or the perceived lack of skill, I think a big part of this problem is the risk that is inherent to theater. Actually, I've had a lot of conversations, and I'm sure other people who know Trevor have had a lot of conversations about his views on elitism in theater and how we kind of have to squash that. There's this idea that your theater is this in this sphere, this high place that you have to produce the best quality in the best way, following these protocols that we have had for years and years. And I'm feeling as though we have to learn as a community and as audiences and as theater makers that failure is all right.
And also respecting the process rather than the product.
Right, and workshopping things is important.
Yeah. I very much agree with that. I think this has been like an ongoing. This has been always my not my ideology always, because I was always trained in like community development and the value of workshop. But I think a great way for a community or a community as Hamilton to grow is to actually focus on building and engaging that community rather than putting on shows. So like Hamilton has been in the past, however many years I've been here or been an active member of this community, it's just like a show spitting machine. Every single festival you have to have a show. So like that's something that I want to like bring up as well.
What are other things that we can do?
So like how else can we really engage the community, which then will bring out all the like outreach to different other communities that have been for so long being untapped, right? So how do we make that happen?
Right. And I think another byproduct of that, once you remove the risk of or the pressure of putting on a great polished piece of theater, you're more likely, at least I would be, I'm not going to speak for everybody, but I would be more likely to take risks on those I work with, and that speaks to the larger problem that I think, because of the massive risk, I think a lot of theater makers choose people they've worked with because they know of the quality of their work.
That was sort of
go ahead.
That was sort of the intent of the original initiative in a way. Was not only was it people that that sort of all knew each other, but the plan was also to do these stage-ready pieces. So things that we knew had a proven track record and we knew were going to be things we could put up and were kind of quote-unquote fail-safe, things that had some success in the past. But an initiative like this and a model like this doesn't necessarily need to be about product and about a finished piece. And I guess the big question is, what does that look like, and how does that fit into the community here, and engage with the community as well?
Right, So can we just take a second to acknowledge what's being said on the...
So Lauren says, what was the thought process behind the original name of the collective? Why not choose another name that doesn't imply that it represents all of Hamilton indie theater? And then Trevor said, Lauren, the title came about is trying to label that we are from Hamilton and being indie theaters. We realized too late that our title implied representing Hamilton. Was a problem.
Thanks, Trevor. I totally get all of that. So
Yeah. Okay, let's come back to the community thing. And like, how do we make that happen? No, for sure. It is really hard. Like, how do we get people to come out of their houses and like not watch a show but do a workshop with us, right? Like, how do we really do that? We did something like that when we were when we did Hamilton Public Library, the Culture Days.
And it was hard to get
It
people
was
out.
so hard to get. We actually had a very limited amount of people, but also it didn't really help the fact that it was a snowy day. But like, it is definitely really hard. And like, when do we start reaching out to those people, or like selective initiatives as well?
I kind of think like just like, it's gonna sound corny, but like bringing theater to people like where they are. Because like I think you've heard this story before, but like I think it was last year that Supercall added theater to it.
It was just last year.
Yeah, it was just last year. And like I was walking through Supercall with my mom just because she wanted to go. And my mom hates theater. She never comes to any of my shows. She's bored. She doesn't like Shakespeare. She hates Shakespeare. She's like, what is he saying? And like we were walking and we saw a performance happening in a storefront by Industry. And like they were using headphones. And she was like so intrigued just by the fact that there was a show happening in a storefront and that there were headphones and people were watching. And so she made us stop and she was like listening to the show and she was so excited and she was giving it to my sister. She's like, listen to the show. And like, that is the only time in my entire life, I'm only 23, but that is the only time in my entire life that I've seen my mom take an interest in theater. And then that made her take an interest in me because she was like, is this what you do? Like, do you know these people? You should meet these people. I'm like, I know some of them. She's like, that's so cool.
Some of them are in the room.
Right? Some of them are here. So like things like that. Like, yeah. Yeah.
I'm more of the audience than I am a performer, at least in this space. And I've been in Hamilton for a relatively small amount of time. I think that it's a false dichotomy between diverse theater and accessible theater. I'm frustrated by this continual call towards accessibility because I think it can be patronizing. And I often find theater in Hamilton, and this is probably going to get me things thrown at me, so please take it with the amount of generosity that's intended, is often amateurish in ways that I find difficult, like difficult actually to sit through, formally do, like, and there's all sorts of ways of doing innovative work, and there's all sorts of ways of doing diverse work and interesting work, and work that's inexpensive and work that is sort of this avant-garde tradition. And I have no problem at all being isolated, and I have no problem at all being frustrated, but I have problems feeling coddled. And sometimes I think that I think that goes along with the diversity component, is that I worry that, and the people, I'm trying to be very, very delicate here, so I'm not very good at being delicate.
You don't have to. You don't.
Yeah.
I'm a white dude, so you don't want to be too much of an asshole. But they pair for me this often sort of very sort of white space, and this often space that doesn't push formally as much as it could, and this kind of mutual problem of sort of obsession with access. If I go into a space and I don't know what's going on, I'm okay with that. If I go into a space and it's not in English, I should be okay with that. I shouldn't have to expect access in any level in theater.
Okay. I'm trying to understand. So you just said that you don't, as a person who, I'm sorry if I'm identifying you, do you require accessibility? Is
no.
That, okay.
At all, period.
Okay. Yeah, give me a second.
Sorry.
No, please elaborate even further.
Yeah.
You can
talk
as much as you want.
Yeah.
I didn't want to dominate the space.
No, it's okay. Don't worry.
I think we have this obsession with having things understandable, or we have this obsession with having things accessible, or we have this obsession with having these things immediately available to ourselves. Right. And I don't think that theater necessarily has to be in that tradition. And I often find Hamilton theater accessible on any number of levels. And that expectation means that sort of things that may be considered inaccessible are cut off.
What sort of things do you
Well, we're talking about in terms of disability, but also we sort of continue returning to the same canon, and we keep having the same sort of naturalism sometimes, and we have this sort of, we want to make sure, I can't say we because I'm an audience member and not a performer, but I'm okay with not knowing, I'm okay with being pushed, I'm okay with being isolated, I'm okay with not being positioned immediately to absorb what is being given to me. And I think, and I'm okay with not being in a space that is not
for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if what you're talking about is, I feel like you're talking, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like you're talking more about readability than you are about accessibility.
I think that there's two forms there.
What's the difference?
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
I mean, you probably can speak to it. At least in
that I can't speak to it.
in my impression, like just listening to what's been said, I think there's a fine line between exclusion, like physically, that like creating a space that certain people may not necessarily feel comfortable in entering, and that can sometimes happen when it's always been a lot of white people, and you know, it feels like it's not for us. But at the same time, like I think having a space where people feel comfortable in entering may not necessarily be the same as a space where the content or like the conceptual meat of something is watered down for it to be like easily palatable.
Yeah, that's.
Is that what you're thinking?
It's a much cleaner way of
teamwork.
Yeah, I also do think that like it's the type of theater as well, genres of theater as well, like that we explore, that much more pushes and challenges ideas. I think the way that you were trying to go towards accessibility.
I would just like to comment, coming in as a white man and seeing the group outside, who I think was East Indian. I'm not sure, was listening and watching something on the screen. I felt like, oh, I didn't belong, or I wouldn't understand. So I think it does work both ways. And I agree with you, but that's one of the problems of accessibility. I would like to just get some clarification, because originally we were talking about theater, we were talking about audience, we were talking about the different theater companies that have existed here for a long time. And then all of a sudden we switched to workshops and just offering other things other than theater. So I'm not sure what we're talking about. Theater requires two things. It requires people telling a story, I think. Anyway, this is my opinion. And then it requires people receiving it. There's no point in acting if you don't have an audience. And two things that can happen. An audience cannot come, one, either because they can't afford it or they don't think they will get their money's worth, or two, they don't like what the story you're telling. And so that's the fine line of constantly saying, what story do we want to tell and where do we find an audience? And whether, I find it appalling that Stratford's doing a Rocky Horror Picture Show, you know, and I may be the only one, but it's like, again, they're going to get an audience for that. And maybe not enough people are coming to see the Shakespeare.
What do you find appalling about it?
Yeah. What do I find appalling about it? I've seen Rocky Horror Picture Show. I liked it. I don't think I ever need to see it a second time, but I'm certainly of a different generation. And will it be bringing more people younger people into the theater? Absolutely. And from a business point of view, that's what they need to do, because the demographics is mostly it's people over 50 or 60 because they have the money.
Okay. I just want to ask you a question in terms of that. You don't think it's do you think it's solely because of the business? That like from a business point of view, it taps into a different type of demographic, not just the things that's discussed in the show, or like the thing
I
itself?
have no objection to anything that's discussed in the show.
Okay, no, I'm just asking if you think if the business, or like if the purpose of tapping that demographic is only because of money and not because it's trying to engage a certain type of community in a different way. Does that make sense? Is my question making sense?
Are you saying are you asking, does he think that they are doing Rocky Horror just for the money, or because of what it communicates to of trying to bring in a different community?
Yeah, I think that's the question.
Well, as I said, I think it'll bring in younger people. But I don't think Rocky Horror Picture Show is necessarily considering where it started with the movie and how long ago that was and everything. And I haven't seen any particular group of people picking that up as their banner thing that's saying this represents us, you know. Yeah, that's it. I just think that, and then comment a couple of things about friends and all of that. I think it is you. I've heard many people say you audition like crazy, and if I personally feel if they're right for the part, I'm going to hire my friends and people I can work with. And but I think the question is, how do we get more people to come to audition to do this? To stretch other than white people.
Can I jump in just 1 second? So I think we're kind of hitting two different areas right now. We're talking about professional theater, something as large as Stratford and the audience that they have, and then the ecology here in Hamilton, and the sort of culture that exists that benefits producers who are trying to produce work for themselves, not for themselves, but produce work and create to like I said at the beginning, bridge that gap between all those smaller community amateur theaters and Theatre Aquarius. But to just answer quickly, just my own belief on the Rocky Horror thing.
Can we take a second to
Yeah.
acknowledge people up here trying to think?
Yeah.
Claudia, can you be your voice?
Yeah, sure. So I think we missed Kelly's point that when you take theater out of traditional spaces, you allow other ways of communicating to emerge. The four walls make the creators and the audience feel like they have to respond in a certain way. Trevor said Hamilton has a million interesting spaces, way more than the surrounding area. It's definitely the future. Then Laura asked to sort of see who was at the table, and Rose turned it around, which was nice. And then Trevor brought up that I think Rocky Horror is / can be an artistically viable piece of programming. I think it can be a good part of the emerging conversation about gender / sexuality.
Okay, are you done?
I'll wrap up really quickly. I think there's one benefit to having a show like Rocky Horror Picture Show that will reach Stratford audiences, in that if we're talking about how do we get more people out to auditions, if we see more representation on stage, and that's not the only thing. On stage is not the only place where representation should occur. Representation has to happen at the leadership level, in the design level, everywhere. However, audiences are seeing something like Rocky Horror as opposed to the standard Stratford fare. I don't see any way that's bad.
I hear you.
Yeah, so you said that.
I'm sorry,
Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Hi. Rose?
Yeah. That Tim's kind of like expression of what was going on at Stratford is not the same as the Hamilton ecology, and I think it's very much the same, because producers in Hamilton at Theatre Aquarius, in the collective you created at Stratford, are looking for economically viable ways of creating and producing theater. And I think that means that sometimes they opt for, people who are programming seasons opt for things that they feel are safe bets when it comes to producing. I think this may have been a little bit of what was going on with this collective in terms of looking for shows that were remounts of things that we perceive to be of a certain kind of quality.
And if I just Theatre Aquarius also did Rocky Horror Picture Show.
I don't think it's just about the Rocky Horror
No,
Picture
I
Show.
don't, I don't want to have a discussion on that.
No, gotcha. No, I think it's the Rocky Horror Picture Shows of, so that it's a certain type of show. If that's I think clearly. I'm trying to understand.
I do have. I just want to put something else out there because I want to thank the group of friends that got together and started, and albeit perhaps a bit misguided, but I will ask it. Why didn't you do this?
I did.
And, yeah, I'd like to know why or how it didn't work. Or did it work? Pardon me for assuming.
Okay.
But you did say did.
we are doing
okay,
this.
Good.
Sorry to say. So that rubbed Annalie and I a bit the wrong way for sure when you guys came out, and it was this is this new creative idea that we've got that nobody else has thought of, and we'd already posted. But I mean, to me, it didn't. I'm not sure that it mattered on the larger scale that lots of different independent groups can decide that they're going to do seasons together. We're also not represented in Hamilton Theatre. It's 2 white women doing theatre for sure, and I was actually quite conscious of that with when we went to promote our season. We had a big back and forth about whether or not we would make a deal out of the fact that it was female-led and that it was female-driven. And I said, like, I want to be really careful here that we're not trying to represent feminism in our work either, because we're not very intersectional in our feminism, for sure. If you don't mind, I'm going to totally derail this and come back to, we made an audition posting a couple of weeks ago around, now, I already know there's some inherent issues in some of the shows that we chose to do too from an inclusiveness perspective. But I mean, we both like Shakespeare. So posted 2 Shakespeares, yeah. Posted 2 Shakespeares. We posted a couple of other shows that are non-Shakespeare. And I'm wondering about how to make that posting more welcoming, because I've got basically 30-ish, mostly white people auditioning for me at the moment.
It's got to be your show selection.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, for example, what shows did you post?
Sorry, right. It's Romeo and Juliet. Oh, this is good advertisement for me now. Romeo and Juliet. The most massive woman wins. Anyways, I'll send the posting around again. John Patrick Stanley's The Dreamer Examines His Pillow, and Macbeth. So I completely appreciate that Shakespeare inherently can put some people off, because I know it comes from a colonialist English tradition. I'm a Scottish person putting on Macbeth, but I don't see it that way. So I can only see it as a white woman. I've always seen it, and Shakespeare's always appealed to me in this way that it should be inclusive. It should be about everyone being involved. It resonated with me as a teenager because I was a weirdo in my English class that didn't fit in, and liked reading all this poetry. And I found a lot of things that spoke to speaking truth to power and undermining systems of authority in Shakespeare as well, which I don't think are mutually exclusive to diversity, right? Like I feel like those things can go hand in hand with it.
I think definitely. I think to make Shakespeare or any kind of classical text more accessible is to redesign your vision and how to make that accessible towards, if you're talking specifically about diversity population. Yeah. If you're gonna frankly just stage Shakespeare as it is in period costumes, that's just not it. It doesn't represent people of my color weren't back there back then.
Comment up here that was relevant.
Yeah, no,
I
just
what Kelly's.
Kelly said, I put out casting calls that asked for people who represented the range of voices that exist in our city on the Theatre in Hamilton Facebook page. I didn't really get any response. And then said, so I did start reaching out to people I knew, made me think that I needed to broaden my circle. I think that there might be a disconnect to the broader community. Then Gord said, Kelly, has there been any study into why you didn't get the response you were seeking? Kelly said, I'm wondering if what I was casting for was of interest to the people I was looking for. So I feel like that kind of reason.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Also, I think that we think that finding like diverse people to be in our work is really hard and impossible, and that they just don't exist. But like, there's so you really have to connect to the different communities that you're trying to do outreach to. Like, there's this play that I was in and I left, and it's a role for like a non-binary actor. And the first person they had was non-binary. They couldn't do it because something happened. Then they found me, another non-binary actor, and then I couldn't do it. And then they found another non-binary actor, right? And that's in Hamilton. And they were able to find 3 different actors for this one role, right? So like, it's not like it's impossible. We have to change the way that we're doing outreach, because like, that's freaking amazing.
But then are you saying that a non-binary is the only one to play a non-binary?
Yes. I am absolutely, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're going to limit your opportunity for playing in theater, then, aren't you?
But it's
no. They're not saying that non-binary people can only play non-binary characters. A non-binary character is the only person that should play that character.
So a white person should only play a white character.
Yes.
No.
I think-
Whoa. I don't know what that. I don't know
So
what that
think
means.
if I can just
question.
articulate like the larger question, I think that some people are like articulating is that it's not appropriate for people outside of a certain experience to voice the story of someone who may come from like a marginalized community.
I
I
understand
think that, like,
but
in
you
the
re-
future,
Yeah.
when non-binary actors can play non-binary roles and trans actors can play trans roles first,
Yes.
when that is established, then we can talk about cis actors playing those roles. But until we can own our own roles, absolutely not. There are stories, we
Yes.
deserve to tell them first. And until we can tell them the way that you can tell yours,
Right.
then we can talk about that. But that's a long way in the future. There's a lot of work that has to happen before we get there.
I hear you. I just, it's,
You have to.
well, first of all, I didn't know you were non-binary. So now you've told me, so now I have to say she's non-binary, but it doesn't change anything about how I was relating to you. And if that's the case, the number of gay men who never should have been playing straight roles for the last 100 years is phenomenal.
So
Would you say that a straight person is a marginalized person and they have a different story? Would you say that?
No,
If
not
I may.
necessarily.
May I? I think what you're saying has some truth in it. My name is Carissa, and I should fix my hair before I show up on camera. What you're saying has some truth in it, that any actor, if they are talented enough and can portray a role, should have that opportunity to portray a role.
Right.
Call Me By Your Name was two straight guys, arguably, that portrayed this gay couple because they were the best for the role, according to the director. However, we're not on this giant Hollywood can choose from amazing.
Right.
We're at a Hamilton level, at a local level,
Yes.
where it's part of our responsibility to be, frankly, educating people who want to start acting, who don't know where to start. Like, we're at those first steps. We're those
Okay.
first steps for people who are starting to tell their stories.
And
Yeah. It's not our job right now in this space to give you a 101. There's a bunch of shit that needs to be processed. And if your example, for example, of queer theater is Rocky Horror, you should go home and do the work, and then we can come back and have a conversation.
It is not. But some other people seem to think it is.
But like,
you know what? I'm going to step back because I don't want to monopolize this. I
think that would be a good idea.
And that's fine. And I'm not stepping back because I'm irritated. I really need to hear more and learn. Because in honesty, now you're the first binary person I've met. So
we've met two.
Two? Okay. All right. Nice to meet you. Okay.
I do think that's a point that's brought up all the time, though. I think we're being able to take it. It's a point that's brought up all the time: is who plays what characters and where do. It's why we get. It's why we get roles that technically, like, actually don't belong to certain white characters, white women or white people. Or I'm thinking of Scarlett Johansson playing whatever role it was that didn't belong to her. Thank you. It's why we get that. Is that question that does come from an innocent place of who plays what roles. And what actors should be or shouldn't be playing what roles. And Jamie, I think you hit a point, especially on this local level, especially on this Hamilton level, you tell your stories first.
Also, it's quite unfortunate the fact that any kind of, as soon as you put a racialized artist in a company, it's somehow their job to educate everybody else. Instead of doing their job that they're getting paid for, to learn skills, and that they're there for. It's really not. As a relevant artist, I think it's exceptionally important for people to educate and keep up. If they especially want to be relevant. If you want to go ahead and be a person and be that person, go ahead. That's not a problem. But if you are reaching out to these diverse communities, if you are reaching out to people that are of marginalized, racialized, disabled communities, you need to have as a company yourself, you need to have an agency to be able to receive feedback and to be able to accommodate and be accessible towards your artists. Yes, to adjust.
I'm not in theater, so I can't really speak to that side of things, but I think there's a similar thing happening and has been happening for a long time in health and arts. And I think we're actually we're seeing it right now, and like what you're saying, I think resonates a lot with me. But I think the expectation is always that persons of color, racialized artists, or other marginalized artists should be doing the emotional labor. And I think that's, to some degree what happened in this instance is that you guys had to come in and kind of, call your friends out, or, someone maybe like Claudia that you knew, and like initiate that conversation and put in that like emotional, it's really exhausting work. And I think it's about time that white allies would step up and take on some of that work. Because
there's lots of resources out there.
Oh, for sure. But I think I'm just bringing it up because maybe not everyone's thinking this way. But I apologize if people are. So I don't want to sound like I'm preaching or anything. But I think it's not sustainable for people like you or me or whoever is like racialized or marginalized to continuously be expected to remind people why did you put out a job call and only interview white candidates? Why did you put out a job call and assume that because no racialized people apply that you did your work, or whatever?
That's a great point. That's something that I also want to talk about a little bit. But probably
the newest comment from Lauren says maybe we should also ask who is telling these stories. I think that was in reference to talking about casting and who gets to play different roles. Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about the longevity of this entire, sustainability, of course. For example, as a racialized artist myself, I'm not interested in short-term solutions. I'm really not. I'm getting tired of getting angry every 2 years. So what can we do about it? What are some of the things that we can implement?
Yeah.
So we kind of get it through our head that, hey, this is a really big problem, what you're doing, and how do we move forward?
What do you consider a short-term solution?
Short-term solutions, I work for a company once and then they forget about me the next year.
Or putting on Rocky Horror Picture Show.
So would that be like having almost like a token show or a token moment that you do something that is outside of what you normally do, as opposed to just having that be on the same level as regular programming? I guess for something like Stratford Festival.
Yeah.
As opposed to doing Rocky Horror and then a million Shakespeare shows, having that parody be closer.
Yeah. And I think maybe also the difference between having a show that's filled with people of color or disabled people or queer people, and then having your leadership be mostly able-bodied straight white people, because that's a short-term solution, or it doesn't really it does contribute to growth, but not in the same level. And
you're only concerned about not being called out a racist because you're only concerned about on-stage representations at that point. So that is something that's definitely a problem in this community, I would say, for sure. So how do we fix it?
Yeah, it's a big question.
It is a big question.
It's a big question.
Yeah. Something that, sorry to call your name up, Jesse, but something that Jesse and I were talking about earlier in relation to this, maybe this would again create employment and create a job opportunity, create a bridge. So I read an article a couple of days ago, and this was actually in relation to Actors Association, Actors Equity Association, and this was on Playbill actually. And they actually just hired their first director of diversity a couple of months ago. And that is just so incredible to me because you only see that in a corporate level where they're equipped to talk about these things. Why not introduce something like that? Why not open up those doors to people who are equipped to talk about those things? As much as I don't like spoon-feeding diversity to white folks, but we have to be thinking about solutions and compensation, unfortunately, but we have to work here together. So why not? How does that sound in terms of that? Do we think that's are you
proposing that the collective have a diversity?
If that's a problem, if that is something that they could think is a big problem and that is something that could actually fix it, do we see that as a sustainable solution? That someone who is equipped and trained, of course, technically this can also be done by a dramaturge, but like, yeah, who is equipped to make that bridge between communities if these certain communities aren't, or like if these, so let's say, outreach. Yeah, outreach, but like also that has like that sense, artistic knowledge. Yeah, for sure.
So long as that person doesn't end up being the emotional laborer, and we bring in like that one person of color and say, well, we've done our share, and you do all the work, and we're gonna like
that again,
argue with you at every turn, and exhaust you, and like we really like take everything you've got mentally and intellectually, and then just
I just want to say that there are some people at this table who haven't spoken yet. So is there anything that anyone wants to say? Not putting you on the spot.
You have a question.
Claudia, how can we address the issue of having no resources money for a diversity officer?
Sorry, that was in response to the thing about it.
Maybe we need to find people to mentor emerging artists. That's a great thing. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Find people to mentor emerging artists in the use of both, which will broaden the range of voices in the creative leadership and management.
Yeah, I agree with that. Something artist training projects is something that I'm super passionate about as well.
We have alert here. Take it away. But like we have like alert, which is like a artist producer training program. Yeah. In Toronto, there's this really great organization called the Amy Project that's targeted at young women and non-binary and trans youth, and it's like an artist mentorship program. And it's like almost completely barrier-free. They compensate their young artists financially. They provide tokens. They so they can get there and back. They provide food, which could be like a barrier for some people. So like, how do we bring something like that to Hamilton? Do we even want to? I want to.
I want to. I want to be proactive about this community that I want to actually make art in. So, and I want to be training for youth.
Yeah. I think too, like, so I see Trevor's question, how can we address the issue of having no resources, money for a diversity officer? My concern is, again, asking for more emotional labor, especially without conversation. And I think that's also tied to like how we create a program like what you're talking about in Hamilton around resources. But I think like, especially in response to Trevor's question, like how do you address the issue of having no resources for anything? Like diversity is not a thing that you tack on to the end of it's not the last line of your producing budget. Like that should be reflected in such like a stupid producer project, but like in your production budget, in your like diversity is not an add-on. It should be ingrained in your process. So I guess the question is like, how do we do that? How do we create like longer outreach relationships with people?
It seems to me that part of the question here is really not just how do we increase diversity for the sake of increasing diversity. It's how do we create excellent performance? And I think that forces us to ask a whole series of questions. So part of me thinks that it shouldn't be a diversity officer. It should be your artistic director who's doing this work, because we're living in a part of the world where we're very close to the point where the majority of population, in fact, probably the majority of the population now is not white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, but we have inherited a way of thinking about theater, a theater institution that is very much marked by our history as a settler colonial nation. I mean, I think it's next to impossible to read the history of Canadian theatre and not conclude that one of the reasons we do Stratford and Shakespeare and that got the lion's share of resources for many, many, many years, and still gets a huge chunk of resources, is because, I mean, it was a colonial project. It was, this is going to create civilized settlers in this outpost of empire. And somehow I think that we've equated excellence with this colonialist project. So, I mean, my feeling is, looking at the kind of work that's going on, it's not hard to find out about what people of color, people who are perceived to have disabilities, it's not hard to find out what kind of excellent work is coming out of those artists. But, you know, you cannot read an issue of Canadian Theatre Review without hearing about this. You cannot go, there's many, many blogs that are dealing with this stuff. so some of it, and I admit, you know, I come to this from a perspective of just trying to look at what's going on in the world. But like, I think that what is at stake here is the survival of any kind of relevant thing that we may or may not want to call theater. It's not what's at stake is not, and I don't mean by this that it's unimportant whether people of color, for instance, or people perceived to have disabilities, or people who have different gender identities are included. That's extremely important. But it's not important because we're doing them some kind of favor. It's important because I do not believe that you can make excellent performance at this moment in the history of this community, of this country, of this world, without being able to cope with that. Right? So that's like, you know, it seems to me that it's so basic. And I do wonder sometimes, so I kind of want to loop back to where all this started in a way. You know, I think like as many of you will know, many African artists and scholars in the 1980s and 90s were contesting the term theater. They said it's a European term. Our sense of what theater is eliminates all kinds of traditional African performances and imposes a kind of European mindset on us. So like, are we capable of saying, like, what do we actually mean when we say this word theater? And I'm curious about, I understand from what Trevor said that the collective started from the idea of trying to define ourselves, and a piece of that was theater, and a piece of that was independent, and a piece was public artists, right? Mm-hmm. So I kind of come back to, like, so what do we understand would get held within those categories? Like, what do we understand excellence is? Because I think there's a real danger of saying, I think the danger of the mentoring piece is potentially, we are here and we need to get these people here. And maybe the real problem is we are here and other people are here and here and here, and we need to find some place to meet in the middle. It's not that we have to raise people up to our level.
So I wonder if that goes back to the piece we talked about a while ago at the very beginning about like workshopping and like taking the emphasis off like performances and I guess presentations and talking more about process and honoring the process, because I think if you put focus on honoring process, then you put focus on honoring different types of process, and you don't worry so much that the thing that you get in the end is marketable or the traditional definition of theater or good or any of those things. I wonder if that's a way to sort of contest this like rigid idea of excellence.
I wanted to add kind of like we were talking earlier about how do we broaden our circles and find the people who can portray different stories. And again, going back to this excellence thing and this idea of theater that we have, it's like, what about kind of attempting more grassroots initiatives? So me coming here and speaking, like I'm a bit out of the loop. I've been living abroad for the last few years. I've recently come back to Hamilton. And while I was away, I had the opportunity to do a bit of improv and theater directing as well. And so I was in a position where I was with a lot of people from other Western English-speaking countries. I was in South Korea, but there was still a really big community of other expats who wanted to produce theater, just for the sake of producing English-speaking theater for other expats, for Koreans, for everybody. And so we had a really diverse group of people from the States, from England, Ireland, everywhere. And we did things like play in a day, you know, where you get a group of people, all of them together, put them in little groups, like separate them, little groups, and you work together to write the play and direct the play and perform it by the end of the day. And that's a really great way to like kind of cast your network and meet people from different groups, different walks of life. Play in a day, 10 play festivals. I mean, not to the scale of the Fringe Festival, of course, you know, but where you just get people together for a week, different groups. So you have somebody who can organize and sort them out into different groups. And that's how you can really expand your network. And I ended up directing plays that had, you know, I chose stories that it doesn't say explicitly what race this character is. It doesn't say explicitly what they look like. So you're free to put whoever you want in that role, I think, unless it explicitly states that, you know, they have this story and they come from this marginalized group. So I think kind of going back to like a bit more grassroots focus might be good in overcoming some of the problems where it's like, well, okay, I don't know where to find this type of actor or this type, like someone who can represent this, you know, just start kind of small. And I'm a little bit unaware of the different types of groups and independent theater groups that are in Hamilton. Like I said, I've been away for a really long time, and I'm just kind of
lots.
Yeah. And, you know, it seems like there's a big divide. And, you know, something like this, a play in a day workshop, you know, where everybody from all these different collectives and groups can come together and just have fun, work together. And then you can see, oh, this person, they come up with really good ideas. I would love to work with them on a future project and make it more unified. Because like I said, I don't really know a lot coming into this. I'm just volunteering for Hamilton Arts Council. But I think, yeah, instead of having this expectation that we're going to put on all these shows and, you know, get our name out there, like just work together towards like building this community together, and getting along together and like unifying it, I think is a really important thing. We don't need to separate ourselves. I do think there is a lot of merit in that everyone has a different story to tell. Everybody comes from different walks of life, but like we're all in it together and we can all tell those stories together. We don't need to separate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'd like to say.
Thank you for saying that. I think that's very important. I think that brings it back to having an objective for these engagement or outreach that we're doing. We can't just be doing this by blindly doing this just because we have to engage a certain community. Why do you want to be diverse? Why do you want to do these outreach? And why is it important to you? I think that brings it back to, again, having a mandate and having a vision for this certain collective and certain company that you are working with. That grounds you, that tells you exactly what you want to do as an artist and what your objectives are. So yeah, I think focus and having an objective is a great part of the process. Definitely, I agree with that.
Anything up there?
Yeah, let's look at a whole bunch of discussion has happened up here. So it starts with Laura's comment of hardly any company can be 100% representation of all walks of life 100% of the time. I'm not sure that's ever the expectation some are holding your feet. Did I read that right? I'm not sure that's ever the expectation some are holding your feet over the fire, so to speak, for. It's only my view, but I think the trouble was a severe lack of outreach and a misused title. And something to think about is, sorry, it's a bit harsh, writing a role for a woman or casting a woman doesn't make you a feminist. Not being racist doesn't make you an ally, etc., etc. It's kind of effort you are willing to make to seek specific representation for specific and important reasons, because it matters to you, to this actor or character story. Same goes for a collective. Then Gord said, to echo Catherine and Laura, I'm feeling recently that it's straight up lazy/reckless to not publish call-outs for performers, practitioners, production staff, and take in resume and portfolios and go through a process of pulling in. Yes. Then Gord said, new people to every theater group. Lazy if your excuse is not having the available person hours, reckless if your excuse is not having enough time before your show opens, but also reckless because if you don't bring in people by anything other than nepotism, you guarantee death of your company. You strongly limit the breadth of your work and you cut off your own community from engaging. Mm-hmm. Then Josh said, is simply recruiting people into followership positions, being an actor, SM, director, enough? Should the representation not extend all the way to leadership? It can't simply be a lack of trying to bring people in. Then Gord said, for the question of emotional labor, Catherine's right. The artistic director, or anyone forming to put together theater, can be the director of diversity just by caring about better theater. Josh said, if the artistic directors are all cis white males, can they really know what is needed as a director of diversity? Then Gord said, the earlier comments about people working only with practitioners they know because their work is proven or their quality is known when all those folks are white is definitely racist. Then Gord said, if the artistic directors are only hiring white actors instead of only hiring the best actors, then they should be fired for their incompetence, no? Then Laura said, me type good. Then Kelly said, hiring of artistic directors, responsibility lies with the board, who are not always theater people, but business people.
I agree with that. Yeah, that's why I do think, yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that's why like those skills are so like important, like a person who is trained both in performance and society and community to really merge those things. It needs to be an artist who can actually bring that in, and that it needs to be an artist of a marginalized community, just point blank. Because like, how do you make those bridges when you are not even extending an arm towards that? I don't know, that didn't make any sense. Make a lot of sense in my head. But like, yeah, how do you, I'm not going back first. Yeah, like I think it does need to be a person who is really trained. And like that in some sense, if you're really bringing in labels.
What do you mean by trained?
Not trained, skilled, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of skills?
Skills like how to do outreach and how to speak to certain communities and how to, I haven't really thought this through, but yeah.
So someone who can be like a community leader, like someone who
yes,
connects with different communities, knows how to connect with people on like a personal level.
Yeah.
I just think the comment about like the board making all the decisions just kind of like shows why like independent companies and collectives is so important. Like being able to make those decisions. And we kind of like tried to talk about it before, but like moving forward, like what can we do?
Or if you're creating if you're responsible for creating board when you're starting a company, like what kind of representation, what kind of board do you want to put together?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the other end of that, I mean, as a talking here. On the other end of that, it's not like we can really wait for a person of color to become artistic director. We shouldn't have to sit and wait. Oh, well, there isn't any now, so we'll just wait until there is one.
Yeah, I agree.
I do like what Carissa wrote here, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
It is my job with my platform. Yeah, if you have a platform and you want to make a change, what's stopping you?
Yeah, I think that's something that I personally try to always do with the theater company that I run, that I am artistic director of. I am always thinking, what kind of representation am I using and why am I telling the stories that I want to be telling? Another thing that I scribbled down is that my company has thus far almost exclusively done Shakespeare on the sole purpose that it costs us nothing to put on.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a huge, huge thing, is that we're in our second year now. We don't have money to buy grants to put on shows. That we're getting there and we want to. And I do try to use Shakespeare to not just be an all-white, all-cis cast, but the reality is something that was written earlier, we've got no resources. So what do we do with that?
Question that's like somewhat related, but kind of like. So with doing Shakespeare, it costs nothing. Are you allowed to like adapt Shakespeare, or are you not allowed to?
Absolutely, it's in the public domain. We can do whatever we want with it, and that's something that I try to do. It's,
like reinvent it.
Yeah, absolutely, all the time.
Yeah.
But I think part of the problem is, I love Shakespeare, but I spent years studying Shakespeare. But the problem is, where we're living at this point in the history of the world, Shakespeare comes with a very long tail.
Absolutely.
And I think the problem is sometimes we need to address the tail.
Yes.
So I sometimes wonder if, as we're talking about this, the idea of casting, more diverse cast, what about bringing more diverse people into the decision-making body that decides what you're going to cast? Like bring people into the group and say, what would you like to be producing? What's of interest to you? Because if you look at people who produced Shakespeare, there's a big difference. We see big differences in how it gets produced, depending who's producing it. I mean, in many ways, Shakespeare is the Latin of the theater world. Somebody once said to me, people from all over the world talk to each other about theater by talking about Shakespeare, but they produce it radically differently. So I'm just reading this and I'm thinking, maybe part of the problem is the idea that we decide what we're going to do and then we get people to fill the roles, whether that's casting or hiring an outreach director.
No, I agree with that. You were saying something?
Well, I mentioned like my time abroad, and I had a lot of opportunity because, I went to these things like this Play in a Day. I did a lot of improv things, did a little bit of acting in these 10-minute play festivals, but I got to know the people in charge of making decisions, and they got to know me. And then I got to cast a full-length play, and I had people in my ear telling me, "Oh, you shouldn't cast this girl. She has a drinking problem. She's going to make your life a living hell." Stupid things like that. Politics and petty, gossipy things get in the way. And, but I was really lucky. I was like, you know what? I'm new to this. I don't really want to have anybody in my ear. And I totally made all my casting decisions on my own. It was a cast of 7 women, and I had like I was very diverse in my casting, and ended up gave a lot of newcomers to the scene a chance to prove themselves and show themselves. So I don't know. I think sometimes you kind of kick out people who have been running the show for a really long time, and they've molded it into, like, I'm not saying kick them out, but give newcomers a chance. Meet people at these workshops and listen to their ideas and take them seriously and give them opportunities to prove themselves and surprise you and impress you.
And opportunities to grow, right?
Exactly.
And I really like that idea. Like, for example, instead of doing Shakespeare, why not bring in a playwright? And why not work with a playwright?
Write a play together.
Yeah.
Collective writing is so inclusive, and like, I feel like my best ideas come out when I have a sounding board and I have a group of people who are also open-minded and creative, and you work together to cut through the crap ideas, and then that's when the best ideas come out, is when you have a wide group of people making decisions.
Can I throw a thing on the table? I love the conversation, though. It's so good to see Hamilton's theater community having healthy dialogue. There are some of us that have been sitting around in this community for a long time waiting for conversation to happen, so I'm thrilled, even though it's been awkward at times. It's good. So to Catherine's point, and a handful of others, there's this thing called the IAP2 spectrum. I do a lot of work on public engagement. And it's this spectrum of how we engage people. So you start at one end of the curve and you go to the other. And at the early end of the curve are things like informing and involving. So you say, an example of informing is like, I'm the Staircase Theater, and I've got a booth at Supercrawl, and my job is just to give out as many pamphlets as possible saying, this is what's going on here. I don't want your input. I don't want your feedback. I want you to just have this thing that has data on it. You might get involved in that, you might not. So it's super passive. I'm just saying, this is what I do. And then you move to involve, and there's these 6 layers. Involve, collaborate, I can't remember what the 5th one is. So they're like these layers of like how much authorship you give the participants in what you're doing. So involve might be, we've chosen to do Arsenic and Old Lace. Would you like to be in Arsenic and Old Lace? Come and audition if you'd like to. Then someone else will filter out whether you're good enough to be in the mix or not. The furthest end of the spectrum, where we try and get so many of the people we work with, the hardest place to get to is engaged, fully engaged programming, where you say, my name's Jeremy, and I work for Cobalt Connects, and I've got 3 staff people, they're skilled in something, and we've got an office space, and I've got a bunch of tablets, and I've got a $300,000 a year budget, and we do cultural stuff, and we've decided that someone's important to us. Maybe we decide that, like, maybe we're a library and we desperately want 13-year-old boys to start reading again. So we focus on engaging them. Or maybe we've decided that as an arts community, engaging our diverse community in all the ways that can be defined is what's important to us. So we put our resources on the table and we say, that's what we have. What would you do with it? And hope that we trust in the process to get us somewhere interesting. It's a really hard thing to do because so many of us that are whatever we are, I'll put I'm white, I'm 42 years old, I'm educated. I've worked hard to get where I am, and it's hard for me to relinquish that which I feel I've worked for. But if it's where I think the most interesting content will be created, to your point, is I think doing it any other way creates safe, palatable, whatever content. But it's so hard to get people, it's almost impossible to get an institution like Theatre Aquarius there. There's so much at risk. But how do we get the smaller companies to do that? How do we get to the place where we can say, we want to be in the same bucket? I think if we were all in the same bucket, we do really awesome stuff. Let's put resources on the table. I honestly think this is a resource problem to a certain extent, to create opportunity for positions, for shows, for different kinds of work, for engaging playwrights instead of using free work. But it's a really hard place to get to. So I just wanted to throw that on the table as a tool to talk about what Catherine said.
That reminds me of an article that I read recently, which kind of talked about allyship, specifically white allyship, and whether or not are you trying to fit marginalized subjects inside a framework that you succeed in, or are you trying to tear down that framework? And I think people, especially white people and people who are not within marginalized communities, get that confused a lot, where it's more of a, I guess, band-aid, or you're not actually trying to dismantle things that you say you're against. You can say like racism is bad, but unless you're saying like I want white privilege to go away, as opposed to I'm going to use my white privilege to give an opportunity to a marginalized person. Like those are two things that can feel the same but are very different. And I think that it's on white people and people from privileged communities to notice when they are actually reinforcing the things that make them successful, as opposed to genuinely trying to dismantle those things, not just fit more people into something that is already marginalizing people.
Okay, thank you. I connected with that because I've been saying a lot that I'm using my platform to raise other voices. So I get that there's a big difference in that. What would you say are the steps to breaking down my privilege? And I don't know if that's an answer. Yeah,
that's a great question. Yeah.
I'd actually like to hear from each theater company, the 4 theater companies involved in the collective. What did you? Well, I wrote down 3 questions. What did you think specifically was your mistake? Number 2, what were you going to do? And what did you think you would do to fix it? So
I can answer the second question. I can answer the second question if you could repeat it for me though, so I don't.
The second one?
Yes, please.
What were you going to do?
From my understanding, coming from being brought in, as Trevor mentioned, it was a matter of bringing people together. I know that I was one of the people that was brought in later in the process. To address that question, it goes back to the sharing of resources. I think I wonder if what we were trying to do was that resource sharing. What was missing was that forum. There was, and I know my personal mistake, if I could bring my personal self into this, was I sat down in a room, I looked at the room, and in that moment, I didn't say, there's something wrong. That moment came too late for me personally. So for me, knowing that what we wanted to do was to share these resources so that we could get to that place where the engagement was happening, but knowing later and too late again that that forum and the people that were engaged were not necessarily the right people. In that room, there were gaps that I can't even finish the sentence, but that's the best I can do to that point.
And what was your first thought to fix it? Whether it's right or wrong.
My first thought was, well, fuck. Pardon. I know my mom's watching. Sorry.
Sorry, Mom.
Sorry, Mom. Definitely the initial reaction. And as I said before, my reaction to looking around the room and noticing too late that there was something very wrong, that was my reckoning. I'm sorry, what am I answering?
What did you think you were going to do to fix it?
Oh, what we were going to do to fix it. For me, it was starting, not starting this conversation necessarily, but furthering this conversation, because it's not enough, and that's been pointed out to me. It's been pointed out to me that knowing there's a problem isn't enough. Everyone knows there's a problem. The problem is there, and I think that it was one of you that said it, that was communicated through to me. You don't care that we know. It's a matter of claiming the mistake and claiming the misstep and the misguidance and being in that bubble that I knew that I was in, and then claiming that mistake and then sitting with it and not just saying, "Hey, I'm sorry," but
actually doing something.
Yeah, what's the word I'm looking for? Actionable. An actionable, not necessarily solution, but an actionable thing to an actionable motion, or even just this, knowing that there has to be a step beyond this, knowing there has to be a forum, there has to be another way we can communicate this way, knowing there has to be more of this, there has to be something that we don't come up with as a singular thing.
Yeah, I think like it's
pulling from those places. It was mentioned before that we're not up here, but it's coming from different levels of a monopoly board as opposed to a ladder.
And I also think that part of trying to think through how you fix it once you have made the mistake, because it is not enough to just go, oops, we made a mistake, is knowing that am I trying to say? I had it, now it's gone. I think there was, the first thought was, okay, so include more people, and then you start to think about tokenism and that idea of just fitting people into an existing framework as opposed to trying to dismantle the existing framework, which is marginalizing people. So you don't want to tokenize. You don't want to say, okay, so we have now one person of color in our collective, and that's enough, and that's perfect, and that's fine. And there are so many things that often go along with that as not a good process, like expecting that person to only tell like Black stories, for example, or something like that, or expecting that person to do all the emotional labor, like Abadar was saying earlier. There are so many issues. So you don't want to do that. But then at the same time, you don't want to just go along with what you've done before. You don't want to say, well, there's no good solution, so I guess we'll just continue to be an all-white collective. And then you also don't want to completely dismantle and go away, because that feels like brushing a mistake and brushing these things under a carpet, as opposed to saying, okay, so we wanted to do this. We actually sat in a room and didn't see it was a problem. And that's a huge issue, like personally, and it's a huge issue professionally and for the community, but it's an issue personally that me or any of us are able to go into a room and not notice that, and not notice there's a huge disparity there. So I think what it does boil down to in terms of fixing the mistake, at least from my perspective, is sacrifice, a little bit what Jeremy was saying before, of you give up your resources, you say, okay, now that I've made this mistake, probably the next best thing for me to do is say, here's what I have, and I shouldn't be using it because I've demonstrated that my instinct is to use it in the wrong way, I guess.
Did you want to answer the question as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that we did was to say that, like, once we had this conversation, to say, like, to address the fact that this group was not anywhere near as diverse as the community that we're a part of, was to say, we are going to stop here, and to like take the time to try to like address the issues in ourselves that brought us to be able to, as Claudia said, look around the room and not think about the fact that we're all white folks, to put it real plainly, right? And I think that for me, the decision to like say we don't go this fall was my first step at saying this wasn't right. And if we're going to go forward, if this idea is to go forward, because I think the idea is good, like to get back to what Jeremy was saying, the idea of sharing resources is a big issue in this city, is that it's really easy to feel isolated when you're producing, and to feel as if you are disconnected and you don't always know, because, you know, as I think Jesse said, that companies pop up and disappear, and so you don't always know who's in it and all that kind of stuff. But to stop and say, okay, we made a mistake, we're going to name it, and we're going to say, and hold this, whatever the collective would be or could be, with as open a hand as possible, to say, whatever this is going forward, like, we want to be able to resource that and to be a part of whatever it ought to be going forward. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm talking in circles a little bit. I'll watch the video. Okay.
Did you have a comment?
Yes. So our organization, HYPE, just received a large grant for mentorship. I'm just putting it on the table that if you'd like to propose how you'd like that mentorship to be facilitated in theater, we have not signed our contracts yet, and I would be more than willing to open that resource to make sure that that we're dedicating more of our efforts back into theater, and just so
that's awesome.
That's all my comments.
Thank you.
So this may be a total out of nowhere comment, but it's not. So I am a storyteller and a theater artist, and I think I was rehearsing, sitting at home, watching this, and I overheard you say, you know, it's all about shows and all, you know, like everything's always a performance. And I was like, I gotta go. So I came here, and mostly to kind of just say, you know, like half of the people in this room, I've only been here for 6 years, right? Yeah. But I go and I look and I say, oh, I know some of you, and I don't know others of you. And I say to myself, well, that's kind of my fault, because there's a world that I have noticed of doing shows here, and also, you know, like my life and being the mom of the world of like, when I was in Toronto, I used to go out to 3 shows a week. And here, I go out to a handful in a little time. And I haven't seen, you know, and I run a monthly series, and for me, the important thing for me is that the audience, the people on stage, for the most part, look like the city that we live in. When that reflects each other, then I think things are going well. When the audience doesn't look like the people on stage, when it's messed up. But this takes a lot of work. And so I urge everyone in this room to go to see hype, to go see shows, to go see things that, you know, you don't know anything about. Because by doing that, then you're gonna, I met you, I met both of you, right? Like, and that's how you meet people, is by going and talking to people. Because really, no one is gonna bite your freaking head off. They may a little bit, but not too much. And if they do, you don't want to work with them. But if you meet them and say, hey, I actually have a genuine connection with you, I want to work with you, let's do this, then do that. As opposed to being like, oh, I think I need blah, 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 blah. And that doesn't work in my experience of a lot of years. I just think that it has to come from, I realize I'm screaming, I'm Spanish. Holy breathe, this has been inside for 2 hours. But I just think that it has to come from a place of genuine connection and truth, that you want to do this work, and being it with racialized artists, diverse communities, what have you. Honestly, for me, it took me 5 years to collect a group of 9 people who are now with Hamilton 7. I know there's 9, but Hamilton 7, a storytelling collective. And a lot of people comment about that it's a diverse group of people, and our guest tellers are a diverse group of people. And the way that I get those people is simply by going and seeing things that are outside of my world. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Now I'm leaving.
Thank you. We want to turn to all the conversations that's been happening.
I just want to note it's 9:40. We did say we'd end at 9:30.
An alarm was supposed to sound. We have the space till 10.
An alarm was supposed to sound?
Yeah, it didn't.
Yeah, we are in here till 10, so 10 is our real cutoff. No matter where we are, no matter what we're saying, that's it at 10.
But we can continue this conversation like at a bar.
This is true.
It just can't be in here. So up here, where do we leave off?
Oh, it's all the way up at the
So
top.
very much.
Yeah.
Good luck. Okay, let's go. Gord said, business people should also want to make the best theater with the most compelling stories, which are mostly not white ones, I expect. I'm thoroughly bored of Wonder Bread on stage. Josh said, RT. Laura said, does everyone really think that it's hard to find people for diversity in collectives and writers groups and casting calls? I find that baffling. Lauren said, so let's say an indie Hamilton theater company wants to produce an original piece of theater in a year. What should they do? Where do they start? In terms of ensuring they are more inclusive and educated. Jesse said, is Shakespeare the only work in the public domain that can be produced for free? Laura said, no. And then Sherlock Holmes. And more, but Sherlock Holmes. Lauren said, often it's something like 70 years after the author's death among other factors. Josh said, how do you convince the powers that be that control the system to step back to allow for new diverse people to move forward? Will they feel like they are shooting themselves in the foot? Michael said, if a company is able/willing to completely tear public domain works, i.e. Shakespeare, apart and reconstruct it to accommodate marginalized voices/experiences, Is it reasonable that those artists could use that same skill to create new work that organically, authentically boosts those stories? Rose said, instead of producing Shakespeare or even reimagining Shakespeare, could we instead produce new work by marginalized voices? Kind of the same thing. Rose and I are on the same wavelength. Lee or Leah said, for future watching, these are 4 great steps towards allyship made for LGBTQ allies, but it works. Ditto. To build on the discussion on resources, does anybody know how accessible local funding / grants are to artists from marginalized communities to actually generate new work with their voices? Do we want to speak to that, or do we want to keep going?
Does anyone want to speak to that?
Just one more quick note. We can't actually stay until 10 on the dot. We're going to cut it at 9:50. 6 minutes, so we do have to wrap up and be out of space.
Okay. There's 2 grants that I can speak of. One I'm in the process of applying to. One of them, like, all of these grants are available to you through OAC and CAC, so Canadian Arts Council and Ontario Arts Council as well. There's one grant from Hamilton Arts Council that I'm aware that goes out. Not too sure how accessible that is, but all the other 2 ones, one of them is specifically actually geared towards emerging artists in training and like artists who want to build new work. Those are grants that go in cycle. So like there's 2 cycles throughout the entire year. That's something that you can always look into in terms of if you want to get money into it. But other than that, those are the kind of the grants that you need to look into, like CAC and OAC.
There is one municipal grant. It's not the Hamilton Arts Council. We're actually not a granting body, but the City Enrichment Fund through the City of Hamilton is the municipal arts funding, and it is available not only to organizations but also to artist projects as well.
How does that work out?
I believe the application deadline is November, the 1st of November, and the city provides several workshops, I believe starting in August or September, about the application process. The application process is actually pretty straightforward. My understanding too is that typically the City Enrichment Fund will fund up to 30% of your project's budget. The chances of actually getting funded, if you put together a pretty solid application, are quite high, is my understanding.
Okay, and what is this fund? Like just 30% of the, and then like what kind of work?
30% of your total project budget, whatever.
Okay.
So it's I don't know, whatever that is. It's within your budget.
Definitely look into that, people who are watching.
Yeah, it's called the City Enrichment Fund.
Okay.
Through the City of Hamilton. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want to draw attention to Trevor's thing that he says, I'm good at grant writing, I'd love to help. So you might want to talk to Trevor. I will say, having been on an Ontario Arts Council grant committee, that you should almost be taking a course in how to write grants, because it really is. It's not a game, but there's so many specific things. And one thing, if you don't have a detailed budget, you're dead in the water. You know, and so. And then, well, if you're asking for, and you should be asked, you know, for how much are you asking and why specifically, da 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 da. But Trevor knows much more about it than I do. But the range of things that, you know, somebody would send in 3 sentences and ask for $10,000, and somebody else would take the time to fill out everything and show us how it was going to be spent. And obviously, that's the one that's going to get more attention.
Sure, perhaps that's a better opportunity for mentorship as well. Instead of actually training people in arts, people should be training. Yeah, like actual.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
This is, and I guess I have to ask that, and not asking anybody specific, but what your training is. But I think all of this, whether it's an actor, whether it's an administrator or anything, apprenticeships are a great thing to do. But I don't think somebody, you know, when you look back at people who have become, you know, whether it's Marianne Elliott and her journey with the National Theatre and directing now and everything else, she paid her dues for years, you know, and other people started as stage managers and worked their way up, but that's how you learn, and that's how you.
Oh no, I'm pretty sure it's very practical, and everybody over here in this room are multidisciplinary artists. Like that's just not practical for people to just be doing one thing. So,
no, but even for somebody to say, I want to found a company, and then it's like, okay, now how do I do that? You know, do the research a bit first, and then I'll talk to people who run a company and say, what do I do? And especially if I want, I have to think in terms of audience. How am I going to get my audience and all of that? But anyway, mentorship is a great one.
Can I say something positive and something cynical all at once?
Let's hear it.
Okay, here we go. Stratford, I'm just going to go back to this because it's been talked about. Stratford is doing Rocky Horror not because, as much as I would love it to be being done, because it proposes various different sexualities. It's doing it to make money because people will go. This is the same theater that is doing South Pacific in another theater, you know, like one of the most racist plays that is around. But I would also further that by saying they're casting people of color now more at Stratford. Also not because it's the right thing to do, but because they know that people want to see it and want to go and want to see themselves on stage. So I feel that we're in an interesting time for this conversation because granting bodies are figuring this out, that people want to hear new voices and see themselves. And the money on these boards are also figuring this out. And I think they're starting to listen. I mean, look at Hollywood. It's crumbling because the macho ways that it's been built doesn't work anymore. Like female-led films are getting more box office. You know, Black Panther, all what we're seeing, how we're seeing things change because they want new voices. I think they're wanted, and I think the point I'm trying to make is that the people with money are starting to figure this out. So I think that grants are favoring. There's that pretty alarm now, right? Granting bodies just need to see more applications by people of color. They need to keep hearing that this is wanted because it is, and they are favoring marginalized people. Show the people who want to make money the numbers that are actually happening right now. I think.
Thank you.
I think.
Cool. Cool. Okay. Well, the long table's done. Yeah, so like Claudia said, you can all continue the conversation at a local bar, at a McDonald's, Subway, whatever you want. Thank you so much. I think this was a really important conversation and like a step in the right direction. And let's see what happens next. Goodbye.
You find out if you have to clear everything or just our stuff?
Yeah.
What's that? I can't hear a word you're saying. I'm going to end the stream.
No, but they're not like those ones.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Feel good about it.
Yeah. I feel like there's like.
I think they can hear us right now.
Yeah. Do you need help?
Yeah, let's just tear everything. Well, don't tear everything because we've got all this. Let's make sure that this stays legible. Yeah, it won't. I won't take long. We're trying to the tables and the chairs.
No, it was very.
I'm gonna Zach.
Will you take your computer off the table?
Send those around to us.
Yes.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.
Leave us.